introduction. It's a great honor to be here today. As I said, I gave this speech on April 7th at Drexel University as the keynote address for their graduation for doctors of physical therapy. And the first thing I said to them was congratulations. And then I said that because we're in a room full of doctors, the first thing I want to do for you is to give you the gift of the best lawyer joke ever. So I told them the best lawyer joke ever, which goes like this: that scientists at Drexel are now using lawyers rather than white mice in laboratory experiments. And there are three reasons for this. The first are that the lawyers they found are now more numerous than the white mice. More importantly, they found that their lab technicians became much more emotionally attached to the white mice than to the lawyers. But then most importantly, there are some things that white mice just won't do. So I love being a lawyer. I spent over 14 years as a high-powered litigator in Washington, D.C. I had to retire in 2010. And I got help from a lot of physical therapists along the way. I want to talk to you today about my story and about the hallmarks of courage in physical therapists that I've had the experience with. My story begins on a subway in New York in 1985 with a new friend in my first week at Columbia College. I was new to the big city. The subway was so loud, and it smelled, and it shook as it would fall right off the tracks. It smelled like a men's restroom. It was covered with graffiti. This was New York in 1985. Many of you were not around or not knowing what was going on in 1985, but for those of you who were, you'll remember Ronald Reagan was president, Ed Koch was the mayor, and John Gotti was about to have his men gun down Paul Castellano at Sparks Steakhouse in 1985. That was New York in 1985. And I was about to meet the most powerful, strong person I've ever met from then until now, in a moment that would not happen now in the land of ADA accommodations, plentiful elevators, Blade Runners, and the story wouldn't even happen now. Because the man near me on the subway sat in a rusty, banged-up wheelchair. He wore an army shirt and pants that marked him as a Vietnam veteran. There were two things I noticed immediately about this guy. First was that his legs were gone. Second, he had the biggest arms I've ever seen. They bulged out of his sleeveless shirt, and he looked like a professional bodybuilder. He sat calmly as we rolled along. When we reached our stop, he followed us closely. We all arrived at the bottom of a long flight of stairs at the same time. So I'm standing here in my jeans and my new shoes bought for college. I felt a little ashamed even being near him. My puny little arms and I hadn't been to Vietnam, and we really hadn't done anything, really. But at the bottom of the stairs, he turned to me and he said, "Could you get my chair?" And before I even had a chance to say yes, he shifted his body and planted his hands on the filthy cement. And as I looked on in amazement, he swung his torso up each stair, following with the next stair and the next, and his arms and the next and the next and the next, up and up and up. I had to run with the wheelchair to keep up with this man. When I got to the top, he climbed back into his chair, said thanks, and rolled away. We were standing there, open-mouthed, watching him roll down the dark sidewalk. It was clear to me that this man was a hero, a superhero, really. He did something on those stairs that I'd never even seen or imagined possible, and he survived Vietnam, which for you today may be in a history book, but for me was a blur of images from the nightly news I saw with my parents watching in our living room. There were images of gaunt prisoners finally coming home, napalm exploding over the jungle, and the famous picture of the little girl running towards the camera, horribly burned. For him, though, he had lost his legs there. He'd made it back, and he kept going. I often thought of the veteran through the years. I had sort of a friendship with him in my mind. Even as I started law school far away from the grimy subway stairs, his image would roll around in my head. Over and over. Why did fate have him getting off at the same stop as I did? Why did he choose me to help him? Then in 1994, in my third year in law school, my relationship with the veteran, that guy that I thought of as a superhero, changed. It changed because at the age of 26, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I got a whole new understanding of the meaning of fate and what fate really feels like. The summer before my diagnosis, I started feeling numbness in my upper legs after a long bike ride. I chalked it up to the long bike ride and to the seat of the bike. But then in the winter, I fell hard on some ice in Boston's Back Bay. I noticed persistent numbness in my hands and arms, which sent me on a merry-go-round of doctor visits until a physical therapist suggested I see a neurologist. This neurologist was the most deadpan person I have ever met. He spoke in a voice completely without emotion. Your MRI shows several active lesions on your brain. What you have is clearly multiple sclerosis. He said this sitting in his small university healthcare office. Now, MS to me at the time was one of those scary diseases with an M, like muscular dystrophy or meningitis or multiple myeloma, but those were just a bunch of letters and Jerry Lewis and his kids, and I'm in shock. I was just in complete shock, and all I could think of was images of children in wheelchairs. My mind was like a dryer on spin cycle. Questions swirled around for me. What does this mean? Would I be okay? Will it get worse? I was terrified. And then he spoke again. I'm sure he was trying to be helpful. The last law student I diagnosed with MS chose to lead a less stressful life. I think he's very happy and selling real estate on the North Shore of Massachusetts. Real estate? Real estate. Ever since I was a chubby little kid working hard to get good grades, I had dreamed of going to Harvard Law School. I remember eating way too many Doritos and nerding out on the show The Paper Chase at the age of 13. And by the age of 26, I'd made it to the top 10% of my law school class. There was no way that I was not going to be a lawyer, and there was certainly no way, no offense to any real estate agents, that I was going to sell real estate. So let me tell them, doctor, with all due respect, I'm not going to sell real estate. And I didn't. So I charged into law practice in Washington, D.C. at one of the best law firms in the country, and I did it while I had MS. I had many MS relapses, which all remitted. MS is an unpredictable neurological and autoimmune disease. Your blood cells become confused and attack your brain and your spinal cord and the lining around them. Scars called scleroses form, and your confused system can make you lose walking or arm function, go blind, endure pain, cognitive problems, and a whole list of other devastating symptoms. Most people start with the most benign form of the disease, which is called relapsing remitting. So you have attacks and then they remit and they get better. Intravenous steroids and new injectable drugs treated my recurring bouts of numbness. My hours were punishing. Sometimes I would go on a war schedule, arriving at the office at 4 a.m. and staying until 11, day after day after day. I worked as a young lawyer on historic cases like the defense of President Clinton at the Senate impeachment trial. And my next big case led to a great story, and frankly, it's probably a better one told at a local bar, but since I'm here, I'll tell it to you now. As a young lawyer, I got a case involving the mafia. I could not believe that I was going to get to work on a case involving organized crime, but I did. And this case was one where the people who were in the organized crime organization said that our client, who was a major public figure, had been in cahoots with them and was dealing with them as if they were associates or friends, and our job was to prove that they were not associates, so that we had to rebut the organized crime members' allegations that they knew my client. So usually when we have to rebut somebody's testimony at Williams and Connolly, we break them down piece by piece by piece. But this particular witness that was coming after us was the saddest, most hapless mobster you've ever met in your life. He walked in for his testimony. He had no tie on, no belt, no shoelaces, so a suicide risk. I can't say much about the case, but I will tell you that it's a mob case, so I'll tell you his name, which was Nino Cucinato. Okay? So Nino really just wanted to be a butcher. He'd come over from Sicily and he'd worked in the local town. By the way, I paused when I was giving the speech to say at Drexel that, just looking out in the audience, just to be clear, this was not in Philadelphia. Okay, this mob case did not happen in Philadelphia. It doesn't involve anybody in Philadelphia, so if there's anybody in Philadelphia here in the audience that might have feelings about it, I guarantee you it had nothing to do with Philadelphia. But in the town where he was the driver for the local mafia boss, and he hated this guy. And so finally, he's telling the story on the direct examination from the prosecutors of how he finally went to jail because somebody disrespected him in a bar. He walked out of the bar. He got his .357 Magnum out of his car. He went back and put one in the guy's forehead and blew his head off, and then walked over and drove to his daughter's house and waited for the police to arrive, crying the whole time. And this is how this sad mobster ended up in jail, wanting to shorten his jail sentence by testifying against our client. At some point during his testimony, though, he got very, very emotional. And he stood up on the stand, and he started crying. He said, "I just wanted to be a butcher. The local mob boss made me a whore." And that's all they could get out of him for like 5 minutes. He had a total nervous breakdown. So I'm a young lawyer here. I'm like a second-year lawyer, and I'm going, this is like TV. This is just incredible. But the partner on the case, who was the very experienced lawyer running our defense of the case, was asking me what to do about this guy. And so I said, well, I don't think we should break him down like we usually break people down. I think we should treat him with a lot of respect, and as maybe as if we're a little bit afraid of him because he's so mental. So that's what we did. The other thing about this witness, Nino, was that he saw the mafia everywhere. He said that the local school principal was in the mafia, the milkman was in the mafia, the dog catcher was in the mafia, the mayor was in the mafia. Well, actually, the mayor was in the mafia, but everybody is in the mafia. So the partner said to me, what should we say to this guy about the fact that he sees the mafia everywhere? So I thought for a minute, and I said, let's ask him if it's ever been said of him that he looks at the world through mob-colored glasses. The partner loved this. And so we're going to use that the next day. So I'm very excited. I'm in a mob case. I've given good advice. They're going to use it the next day. So the morning of the second day of the trial arrives, and I'm there in the lobby of this beautiful courthouse, all ready to go. The advance team is upstairs getting the things ready, the paralegals and the younger lawyer, and I'm waiting for the partner and the client to arrive in the lobby of the courthouse. People are milling all around. It's a big courthouse, big busy place. Well, then MS enters in. One thing that MS does is that it messes with your bowels. So standing there in that lobby of the courthouse, in my Brooks Brothers suit, all ready to go, all earnest and excited, everything I'd eaten for the last 3 days came right out of the back of me, all at once. And if you can imagine how bad this is, just for a minute, it was 5 times worse than you're imagining. It was absolutely devastating and awful, just awful. I'm standing there in a crowded courthouse lobby, not knowing what the world to do. I think my career is over. This is all over. This is just, I don't know what's going to happen. So I start just moving towards the door, and then I spy the most unlucky cab driver in the history of cab drivers ever, sitting there waiting for a fare. And I jump into his cab, throw $200 at him, and beg him to drive me to my hotel, which thank God he did. So I made it back to the hotel, and I made it into the hotel before the partner and the client came out of the same door of the hotel. And I did not go down in history as the first associate of my law firm to crap his pants at his first trial, because nobody found out. I made it back to the case. They used my advice. We cross-examined the witness. We won that part of the case, and all was well. But that's my story about the mafia. It's a story of resilience and a story of fate, because it could have gone completely a different way. People could have shown up, people would have known, but it is also a story of how MS has come to challenge me, and I need to be ready at any time for whatever the challenge is going to be that happens. But I lawyered on through more trials and more crazy hours, and years after the mafia trial, the veteran in his wheelchair reappeared in my world. This time, he drew closer to where it seemed I was heading. This time, I did not think so much about him being a hero. This time, really, all I could think about was him being in a wheelchair. I was at Johns Hopkins for a second opinion, and the neurologist said that I would likely move along to secondary progressive MS. Now, this is a form where your relapses do not remit completely, when you lose function over time. And driving home, I had to pull off the road as I collapsed into tears and terror, my head against the steering wheel. Another day brought more bad news. At a friend's fancy birthday party, the bar was thumping to the music on the dance floor, and I was happily carrying 2 old fashions over my head like this, and suddenly I found myself flat on my face, not for the first time. Walking had become much more difficult. My left foot dropped and caused falls, and this left leg became a heavy, dead log after walking a mile or so. So I started walking with a cane. I also started working hard with excellent physical therapists to hang on to as much function as I could. In addition to difficulty walking, one of my other symptoms is heat sensitivity. On one of those Washington, D.C. days where 90 degrees joins 100% humidity, I had the temerity to try to watch my kids' softball game. As soon as I stepped out of the car, my whole body started to numb out, and my back began like an electric ache in the back. But I was so sick of being defeated that I just dumped myself with ice and staggered to the stands. The numbness deepened in my hands and legs. I started to almost black out. A black tunnel appeared at my peripheral vision. And at that moment, I thought of the veteran again. Once again, here he was with me. The jungle he had fought in had been really hot. stupid, cruel